What if the moment you stopped fighting wasn't your weakness, but the very thing that shook her to her core? She expected resistance, expected pleas, explanations, and justifications, because that's the cycle. She knew disconnection, followed by pursuit. But when you stepped back, with nothing but calm, something unexpected happened. Her control lost its echo. You see, we're wired to expect patterns. When someone detaches without drama, it destabilizes the emotional game. Unaccompanied by bitterness and free from pleading, your silence creates the deepest discomfort, not because you were cold, but because you were composed. Letting go without a fight is not surrender. It's a statement, a psychological shift that says, I know my worth. I don't need to convince you to see it. And in that space of quiet detachment, you didn't just disappear. You became unforgettable. Not by force, but by absence. Not by pressure, but by peace. That's the paradox. Your refusal to fight made her realize she lost someone who never needed to beg to be chosen. If you're done fighting for someone who never stood beside you, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. I walk away with grace, not resentment. Now, let's begin. Number 1. The day you chose silence over self-betrayal. Right now, you may be tempted to speak, to call, to explain, to fix what's unraveling. That's the instinct when you feel the sting of rejection or betrayal. But words, especially in emotional chaos, don't always heal. More often, they hand over your power. They turn your dignity into a performance for someone who's already turned their back. But what if you didn't speak? What if you let silence do what words never could preserve your worth? There's something deeply unsettling about a man who doesn't react. A man who, when hurt, doesn't retaliate, doesn't beg, doesn't chase, but disappears into himself. Not to collapse, but to contain, to gather, to rise. This is the strength Stoicism teaches. Marcus Aurelius never said, suppress your emotion. He said you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And that strength begins with silence. Silence is not absence. It's not a defeat. It's not surrender. It is present in its most refined form. It is the quiet that unnerves, the pause that unsettles. The invisible force forces the other to sit with what they did alone. Because when you go quiet, something shifts. She's no longer reacting to your emotion. She's reacting to her own. Without your words filling the space, all she has left is her actions to echo back, and that echo, that's what haunts her. The move here isn't to withdraw, to punish. It's to protect, to preserve the dignity that often gets traded away in the name of closure. You don't need to explain your absence. Your absence is the explanation, and it's far more piercing than anything you could have said. In practice, this means resisting the urge to reach out. It means not clarifying, not defending, not playing into emotional bait. It means standing so still in your truth that her chaos bounces off you and returns home to her where it belongs. Psychologically, this rewrites the narrative. You are no longer the one being managed or manipulated. You become the mirror, the void. She can't stop rereading the final page of a book she didn't finish. Your silence teaches her the one thing she never expected. You can be hurt and still hold yourself like a king. If you've ever chosen silence, not to punish, but to protect your soul, speak it now. I didn't go quiet to disappear. I went quiet to rise. Number 2, the break that took her grip away. She left you something, maybe a message, a memory, a familiar place filled with echoes of what used to be. But underneath those things, she left something far more dangerous. Emotional traps, triggers designed to keep your mind orbiting her even after she's gone. And that's how you stay stuck, chained not by her presence, but by her absence. Anger, overthinking, obsessive need for closure. These aren't emotions, they're leashes. And every time you respond to them, you surrender your control. That's the game she no longer needs to call. She has you playing out scenes in your head, imagining explanations, searching her social media for signs. And in that silent drama, you lose yourself. But the man who detaches, truly detaches, ends the game. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop bleeding for someone who no longer deserves access to your inner world. It means you stop giving away your power in exchange for nothing but confusion. Stoic discipline teaches this well. It is not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. You were never trapped by her actions, only by your reaction to them. So you cut the cords, quietly, with precision. No more revisiting her messages. No more stalking the digital remains of the relationship. No more thinking that one last conversation will bring peace. Peace doesn't come from her. It comes from within, from reclaiming the space in your mind that she once occupied, like a tenant who never paid rent. This is where your freedom begins, not in confrontation, but in withdrawal. Not with noise, but with no reaction at all. You go ghost. Not because you're bitter, but because you're done leaking energy into places that drain you. You choose dignity over closure, direction over distraction. And that emotional silence, it disarms her completely because she expected resistance, not liberation. Psychologically, this is devastating to someone who fed on your attention. You were the source of their control, but now you're gone. Not missing, but untouchable. You've become what every manipulator fears: a man who no longer responds. If you've ever walked away from emotional bait without a single word, speak it now. She left the trap. I burned the blueprint. Number 3. The mystery that broke her control. She once knew how to read you, your tone patterns and replies timing. You were predictable, accessible, maybe even emotionally transparent. And at first, that felt like intimacy. But over time, it gave her something else: control. When someone can anticipate your every move, they stop seeing your presence as a gift. It becomes expected, ordinary, forgettable. And that's when they start playing, with distance, with silence, with subtle power shifts designed to keep you chasing. But the day you became unreadable, that's the day everything changed. You didn't lash out. You didn't pull her back in. You simply stopped giving her the playbook. You said less. You revealed nothing. And your silence created something she couldn't manipulate: mystery. Stoic philosophy teaches us that our energy is sacred. As Marcus Aurelius put it, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. And when your thoughts are consumed by someone who doesn't value your clarity, you dull yourself for their amusement. But mystery preserves color. It keeps your soul untouched by the need for external validation. And that's what you did. You didn't go cold, you went quiet. You didn't become distant, you became unavailable. Not to punish, but to protect. And in that shift, she lost her hold, because people don't fear rejection, they fear irrelevance. And when she could no longer predict you, she couldn't contain you. That loss of narrative, that's what broke her. Practically, this means No more over-explaining. No more trying to clear the air. No more emotional transparency with someone who used your truth as leverage. You speak only when needed. You show only what you choose. You let her wonder, not because you're playing games, but because you've reclaimed your right to privacy. And here's the psychological pivot. When she can't decode your thoughts, she's left with her own. And that is where the discomfort begins. The guilt, the questions, the regret. You become the blank page. She can't stop trying to write on. You are no longer a character in her script. You're the silence between her lines, the pause that unnerves, the question she can't answer. If you've ever taken your story back by becoming a mystery, say it now. She lost control the moment I stopped explaining. Number 4. The rejection that her ego never saw coming. She didn't expect you to walk away. She expected confusion, a desperate message, or a delayed apology wrapped in longing. Because in her mind, you needed her more than she needed you. That was the balance. That was the unspoken contract. But you tore that contract up the moment you chose silence. Many people leave not to end things, but to provoke, to ignite a reaction that reassures them of their importance. It's not always love they're chasing, it's confirmation of their power. And when you refuse to react, offer no collapse of identity, no emotional begging, what you've done is worse than rejection. You've made them irrelevant. Stoicism teaches this form of quiet resistance. As Epictetus said, freedom is the only worthy goal. Freedom from being emotionally yanked around by someone else's insecurity. Freedom from playing a role in their narrative just to soothe their ego. You didn't give her what she wanted. You gave her something far more difficult to swallow, nothing. And that nothing, it echoes louder than any please, come back ever could. This is where the pain shifts. You're no longer the one asking why. She is. She's the one wondering why you didn't chase. Why hasn't the silence broken? Why didn't you flinch when she walked out, expecting to be followed? The answer is simple. You're done handing your self-worth to someone who expects you to grovel for it. You've redefined the narrative. Your value doesn't rise and fall with her moods. You don't negotiate your dignity for another hit of temporary affection. And that decision, that rejection of her script, of her expectation, shakes her ego to its core. In practical terms, this means not explaining your silence, not justifying your absence, not softening your boundaries to accommodate her confusion. You've made a choice: peace over performance, self-respect over emotional entertainment. Psychologically, this rewires the balance of power. She expected to be the one who left. Now she's the one left wondering. And in that wondering, you become the rarest man. Not because you chased her, but because you didn't need to. You weren't cruel. You were clear. If you've ever chosen to disappoint someone's ego instead of betraying your soul, speak it now. She expected control. I gave her consequence. Number 5. The day you stopped paying her with your energy. Every time you replay that memory, every time you hovered over her profile, every time you mentally rehearsed what you should have said, you were paying her, not with money, but with energy. And energy is the most precious currency a man owns. You didn't see it at first. The subtle ways your focus, motivation, and inner fire were being siphoned off by someone no longer present. She wasn't there, but she was still costing you. And that's when it clicked. You were leaking power. That's the turning point for a Stoic man. Not when he stops loving, but when he stops bleeding. For for someone who no longer bleeds for him. As Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free, and bravery isn't loud. It's in the moment you say, 'No more.' You don't hate her. You don't need revenge. You reclaim what was always yours, your time, energy, and emotional gravity. That's when things change. Instead of stalking her stories, you're building yours. Instead of wondering what she's thinking, you're realigning with your mission. Instead of waiting for closure, you're creating momentum. And while she may still expect to see your name pop up, saying you miss her, asking how she's been, it never does, because you've rerouted your energy into silent structure and self-mastery. And here's the twist: she feels it. She doesn't feel your words, she feels your lack of attention. The invisible rope she once tugged on so easily is gone, and in its place is an emptiness that no other man can quite fill, because you were never just presence, you were powerful. This is where the psychological dynamic flips. She starts wondering, not because you're reaching out, but because you're not. She may even try to provoke a response test, the waters, or drop breadcrumbs, but you won't bite, because you're no longer feeding her ego with your energy. You're feeding your own evolution. This is your edge. The moment you stop leaking power, you start generating gravity. You become the man others feel without speaking. The one who doesn't need to be loud, because his silence says everything. If you've ever redirected your energy back into yourself, say it now. She used to drain me. Now I power my own fire. Number 6. The boundaries that taught her how to treat you. It didn't start with betrayal. It started with small moments, sarcastic comments, brushed off as jokes, cancelled plans. You forgave without question, half-hearted attention you accepted like a gift. And each time you said nothing, something in you agreed. This is okay, but it wasn't. What you tolerated became the standard. And she learned not from your words, but from your silence, that she could be careless and still be kept. That you'd trade your dignity for one more glimpse of affection. That love for you meant swallowing pain, just to stay close, until you finally stopped. You didn't yell, you didn't threaten, you simply withdrew, with clarity, with conviction, not to hurt her, but to heal yourself. That's what most never expect, that your silence is not emptiness, it's enforcement. Stoicism is not about emotional coldness, it's about integrity. As Epictetus said, know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly, and a man who knows his worth does not negotiate his value. He sets boundaries, and those boundaries are not drawn with words, but with absence. You see, you don't have to announce disrespect when you stop accepting disrespect. Your lack of response becomes the announcement. And suddenly, she realizes what was once predictable has become untouchable. The man who once explained himself is now unreachable. Not because you disappeared, but because you evolved. Psychologically, this forces a confrontation she's been avoiding. Who was I to think he'd tolerate less than he deserves? And that confrontation lingers, because the man who doesn't beg to be treated well is the man she can't forget. Not because of what he said, but because of what he no longer allowed. In practice, this means no more replying to half-hearted efforts, no more staying silent when disrespected, and no more explaining your standards. You show them through your actions, through your withdrawal, through your refusal to stay where your value is questioned. And here's the transformation. You don't become cold, you become clear. You don't become distant, you become disciplined. You teach her through absence what presence used to cost you. If you've ever walked away instead of arguing for the bare minimum, write it below. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standards. Number 7. The healing you never had to prove. There's a pressure that comes after heartbreak, a subtle expectation to show how well you're doing. Post the gym photo. Share the late-night quote. Laugh a little louder. Walk a little faster. Pretend you're already free. But the truth is, healing isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. It needs silence. You didn't need to prove anything. You needed to return to yourself. While others rushed to perform recovery, you chose something quieter and far more powerful. You disappeared, not to hide, but to rebuild, slowly, deliberately, without spectacle. Because you understood something most never learn. True healing doesn't demand witnesses. Stoicism lives in that truth. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." And that's what you became: disciplined in your silence, compassionate with your scars. You weren't trying to convince the world, you moved on. You were moving quietly, firmly forward. You didn't post about your growth. You lived it. You didn't broadcast your peace. You protected it, while she was still refreshing her own feed, wondering if you'd watch her story. You were too busy writing a new one. Not for her, for you. And here's the irony. She felt it. Because healing, when done right, sends no signal, but shifts the entire energy field. You no longer respond to old triggers, no longer glance back at open wounds, and the stillness you cultivated that became your armor, that became your presence. You didn't glow up to win her back. You grew up to never need her validation again. In practical terms, this means cutting the urge to show progress, not needing her to notice your strength, not craving a message that says, "You've changed, you don't need it. You changed for real, not for show." Psychologically, this breaks her expectations because she anticipated a reaction, a signal, some small proof that she still mattered. But what she got instead was a man too deep in his evolution to perform pain or flaunt peace. And that's what haunts her. Not your silence, but the fact that your silence is now unreachable. If you've ever healed in silence and emerged without needing to prove it, speak it now. My healing wasn't a message, it was a rebirth. Number 8. The value that was never theirs to measure. You used to wonder if you were enough, if you said the right things, if you showed enough love, gave enough time, and proved enough loyalty. And when it all fell apart, your first instinct was to ask why, to seek an explanation, to find validation in the person who walked away. But then you remembered, your value doesn't require their understanding. That's the lie we're sold. Our worth depends on how long someone stays, how well they treat us, or whether they recognize what they had. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. As Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. You don't prove value, you embody it. You don't negotiate dignity, you live it." The moment you stop trying to be seen by someone who looked past you is when you see yourself again. And in that moment, something breaks, not in you, but in the illusion that love must be earned through suffering. So you walk away, not to be missed, but to remember your own standard. Not to get revenge, but to realign with who you were before you gave them the power to define you. You start building again, internally. You don't need a stage, or validation, or proof. You need direction, purpose, stillness. And the people who once doubted your worth, they feel the shift. Because now your energy is no longer on them. It's no longer available for their confusion or their comfort. You don't care whether they come back, you care whether you return to yourself. In practice, this means refusing to chase closure, letting go of the need to be understood by someone who couldn't even hold space for your truth. You start to act like a man who already knows his value because you finally remember that you never lost it. You only misplaced it in someone else's hands. Psychologically, this flips the dynamic. The more you retreat into clarity, the more they become confused, because nothing is more disturbing than watching someone you discarded thrive in silence. That's when your absence becomes a monument, not of bitterness, but of unshakable self-worth. If you've ever stopped asking to be seen and chose instead to stand alone in your worth, speak it now. My value was never up for debate. It was just waiting to be reclaimed. Number 9, the silence that spoke when words couldn't. You could have said 100 things. You could have defended yourself, explained your love, begged to be remembered in a better light. But instead, you said nothing. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you finally realized your silence would echo louder than any apology ever could. Words are fragile. They get twisted, ignored, forgotten. But silence, it lingers. It's not just the absence of noise, it's a presence that demands reflection. And when you chose to go quiet, you didn't vanish. You became a mirror, a reminder, a weight she couldn't shake. That's what Stoicism teaches us. True power doesn't need volume. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him, who performed the injury." You didn't match her chaos. You didn't respond to her absence with desperation. You responded with dignity, and that dignity became your message. In your silence, she found discomfort, because what you withheld wasn't just attention, it was the energy that once sustained her ego. Every man before you probably begged, bargained, and explained. But you vanished like a myth, real but unreachable. And that silence began to ask her questions. Was she wrong? Did she push away something rare? Why hasn't he come back? What does it mean that he didn't even fight? Those questions don't go away. They haunt. Because people can explain away words, but they can't explain emptiness. In practice, this means you refuse the final conversation. You don't send the last message. You don't update her with your glow-up. You leave space for her to fill with her own reflection. And in that space, she sees not just who you were, but what she lost. Psychologically, this creates a haunting emotional residue, because what's unfinished is unforgettable. You didn't try to win her back. You let her wonder why she lost you. And that wondering hurts more than rejection ever could. You weren't silent to be cruel. You were silent because your peace finally mattered more than her confusion. If you've ever left with nothing but your presence intact, say it now. I said nothing, and that's what echoed forever. You thought fighting would show your love, that persistence would prove your value. But now you see your absence spoke louder than any declaration. Letting go didn't make you weaker. It revealed your emotional discipline. You didn't walk away to punish her. You walked away to protect your peace. And that quiet exit, it's what echoes the longest, not the words, not the tears. But the moment she realized you were no longer trying, she didn't lose the argument. She lost the man who chose himself over chaos. If you're ready to stop chasing validation and start honoring your own worth, like this video, subscribe, and comment. My peace is louder than her silence. Keep moving, not to escape, but to evolve, and let your stillness do the talking.